for, and, well, best not to think of that. Philip ought to visit the man's family. But what to say? There was a solid chance that Philip would sit weeping in Mrs. McCarthy's parlour while the old lady brought him tea. It would be embarrassing for all of them. And it might raise questions. The sort of questions a man shouldn't have raised after his death. Probably best not to do the thing at all. "The place has plenty of beds," he told Walsh. "And my children probably won't actually murder you, regardless of what Ernestine thought." Walsh laughed. "I'll rate you." "No," Philip said too quickly. "Just come." Later, after Philip had been rowed ashore, after he had gone through the motions of thanking the crew and shaking hands with his officers, he threw a final glance over his shoulder at the Patroclus and took his first shaky steps on dry land.
"Did you hear the latest?"
Mrs. Crawford asked as soon as Ben lowered himself into his usual chair. She handed him a cup of tea that he knew without tasting would be exactly as he liked it. She had probably added the sugar in the milk when she heard his footsteps on the path. There were no surprises for him, or for anyone else in Kirkby Barton. And he wouldn't have it any other way.
"Captain Dacre is expected back at Barton Hall in as little as 2 weeks,"
she said, shoveling a buttery crumpet onto his plate. Ben paused, his teacup halfway to his mouth. He ought to be pleased. It was high time for the captain to return to England to serve as head of his family, and, more to the point, deal with his hellion offspring. Ever since their mother had died, the children had been expelled from multiple schools and had driven off a series of aunts, tutors, and governesses. Ben rather admired the children's single-minded perseverance, if not their methods. Surely it was the best of news that their father was to return. Ben hadn't ever met Captain Dacre, the man having apparently spent his entire life contriving to render himself as far from Kirkby Barton as geographically possible, while Ben seldom left the place. In fact, his only impression of Captain Dacre was from a rather sinister-looking portrait he had once seen up at Barton Hall. He was all dark eyes and dark hair and dark expression. Frankly, he seemed exhausting, hardly the sort of figure whose presence would add to the general good spirits of the townspeople. The mere thought of the brooding sea captain stalking the parish lanes seemed to threaten the hard-won comfort of Ben's life. He glanced around the Crawfords' snug little parlour, as if searching for proof that his peace was built on real substantial things that could not be disrupted by the arrival of one man. Mrs. Crawford had been a kind of mother to him after his own had died. Alice, his dearest friend, would become his wife before the summer was out. He was the vicar of St. Elred's. Everything was peaceful, quiet, safe. Even the chair into which he had folded himself, despite being too small and too low for his limbs, had the comfort of long custom. It was all he had hoped for, everything he wanted. No man, however disconcerting his portrait, could compromise that. "Not a moment too soon," he said equably, before taking a sip of his tea. "Something really does need to be done about those children. If Digby catches them in the bell tower again, I'm afraid he might thrash them. Really, the sexton ought to get a better lock for that blasted tower, but likely the Dacre monsters would manage to pick the new one too." "I can hardly blame Mr. Digby," Alice said from the sofa where she was propped up on a flotilla of cushions. Every week there seemed to be less Alice and more cushion, and Ben briefly wondered how long until there wasn't any Alice at all. He got rid of that thought as quickly as possible. "Last week they trampled my violets," she continued, "and I would have thrashed them myself if I could have gotten up and done the job properly." Ben felt his heart stutter at the reminder that she could not get up, might never get up, and schooled his face not to betray his sorrow. "And if I weren't a thoroughly lovely person," she added with a wicked sideways smile at Ben, and suddenly everything was all right, because even if she couldn't...